Imagine this. It's the roaring 1920s. Jazz is playing, the economy is booming, and the United States is enjoying what seems like a golden era. But behind the champagne and flapper dresses, a shadowy story was unfolding, one that would shake the nation to its core. This isn't a tale about gangsters or speakeasies. This is about oil, power, and corruption at the highest levels of the U.S. government. It's the story of the Teapot Dome scandal, the first political scandal that made Americans question whether their government could really be trusted. In today's video, we're going to take you deep into this scandal that made history, exposed greed in the White House, and forever changed how Congress monitors power. From secret oil deals in Wyoming to a cabinet secretary behind bars, this is a story of deception, money, and politics gone horribly wrong. What was Teapot Dome? First, let's set the stage. In the early 20th century, the U.S. Navy wanted to make sure it would never run out of fuel. To do this, President William Howard Taft had set aside certain oil-rich lands as naval reserves. One of these was a curious little formation called Teapot Dome in Wyoming, named for a rock that looked like a teapot. Others were in California, the Elk Hills and Buena Vista oil fields. These were meant to be strategic, off-limits reserves to fuel Navy ships in case of emergencies. Fast forward to 1921, Warren G. Harding is president. He issues an executive order transferring control of these oil fields from the Navy to the Department of the Interior. Why? The story goes that Harding's Interior Secretary, Albert B. Fall, persuaded the Navy Secretary, Edwin Denby, to sign off. That's when things started going downhill. How the scandal unfolded. Once Fall had control, he made two secret deals that would change his life and the nation's history forever. In 1922, Fall leased the Teapot Dome oil field to Harry F. Sinclair of Mammoth Oil, a subsidiary of Sinclair Oil Corporation. At the same time, he leased California's Elk Hills Reserve to Edward Denby of Pan American Petroleum. Here's the kicker. These leases were issued without competitive bidding, which raised serious red flags. Legally, yes, it was allowed under the Mineral Leasing Act of 1920. Morally, absolutely not. The leases were golden tickets. They gave Sinclair and Dennehy incredibly favorable terms while keeping the deals completely under wraps. And Fall? He suddenly went from a modest public servant to a man living a life of luxury. He received a $100,000 no-interest loan from Dennehy. That's roughly $1.8 million today, plus gifts totaling over $400,000 from the two oil magnates. That kind of sudden wealth naturally made people curious. Fall's newfound fortune wasn't subtle. He paid off back taxes on his ranch, traveled more, and generally lived far beyond what his salary could justify. Journalists began to notice. Carl McGee, who would later found the Albuquerque Tribune, started reporting on Fall's lifestyle, and the whispers soon reached the halls of Congress. The investigation began. The scandal might have stayed hidden if not for a Wyoming oil operator, angry that Sinclair had swooped in and claimed the leases in secret. He wrote to his senator, John B. Kendrick, in 1922. Kendrick, suspicious of the entire arrangement, quickly introduced a resolution calling for a Senate investigation. By March 1923, the U.S. Senate officially launched its inquiry. Initially, Republican Senator Robert M. La Follette of Wisconsin believed Fall was innocent, but even he grew suspicious when his office was mysteriously ransacked. Meanwhile, Thomas J. Walsh, a Democratic senator from Montana and the junior minority member of the committee, took the lead in the investigation. For 2 long years, Walsh dug into the deals while Fall did everything in his power to cover his tracks. Records disappeared, witnesses were hesitant. On paper, the leases looked legal, but there was one question no one could answer. How did Fall become so rich so fast? The bribes exposed. The breakthrough came when Walsh uncovered a seemingly small but crucial piece of evidence, Dennehy's $100,000 loan to Fall. This wasn't just a friendly loan, it was a bribe,
a hidden reward for granting lucrative oil leases. With this discovery, the entire scandal exploded into the public eye. Civil and criminal cases followed for years. The Supreme Court eventually ruled that the leases had been corruptly obtained. In 1927, Elk Hills was returned to the Navy, and in October of the same year, Teapot Dome followed. Albert B. Fall became the first U.S. cabinet member in history to go to prison for crimes committed while in office, convicted of accepting bribes. Sinclair served 6 months for jury tampering, while Dennehy was acquitted of paying bribes. Fall's house in New Mexico was even foreclosed on by Dennehy's corporation, ironically due to the very bribe that had made Fall wealthy. Though Fall took the fall, President Harding's reputation never fully recovered. Many Americans saw him as complicit, at least in choosing the wrong people. And sadly for Harding, the evidence of Fall's guilt only came to light after his death in 1923. The political fallout. Teapot Dome didn't just make headlines, it changed American politics forever. Congress realized it needed more power to investigate corruption. As a result, permanent legislation was passed that gave Congress the authority to subpoena tax records of any U.S. citizen. The Revenue Act of 1924 strengthened this power, and the Federal Corrupt Practices Act was reinforced in 1925 to better regulate campaign financing. The Supreme Court's decision in McGrain v. Dougherty also set a precedent. Congress could compel testimony, giving lawmakers a stronger tool to hold officials accountable. In the bigger picture, the scandal set a benchmark for government corruption. Before Watergate, Teapot Dome was considered the greatest and most sensational scandal in the history of American politics. Even today, it's a reference point whenever political corruption arises in the U.S. The long-term legacy. The Teapot Dome oil field itself had an interesting afterlife. After sitting idle for 49 years, it returned to production in 1976. Over the next 35 years, it produced 22 million barrels of oil, earning over $569 million. Eventually, in 2015, the Department of Energy sold the field for $45 million to a private company. Politically, the scandal indirectly helped President Calvin Coolidge, who succeeded Harding. Coolidge's image of an honest, incorruptible leader was strengthened by contrast. He won the 1924 election easily, riding the wave of public distrust in the previous administration. But perhaps the most lasting legacy was how Teapot Dome taught America to watch power closely. It showed that even cabinet members, people meant to uphold the law, could be tempted by greed, and it set the stage for future reforms designed to prevent corruption at the highest levels of government. Why Teapot Dome still matters. Nearly a century later, Teapot Dome remains a powerful reminder of how money and influence can corrupt even those at the top.